3 here, Big 550 KTRS. Dr. Jeffrey Lowell has been with us for years. He's a world-renowned transplant surgeon, and he's professor of surgery and pediatrics at Washington University. Over the last 7 months, he's been stationed in Djibouti, Africa. And Dr. Jeffrey Lowell, you are now back, safe and sound, back on American soil. Thanks for joining us via Skype.
Good to be home, McGraw. Great to hear your voice. Great to hear Kelly's voice, too.
You've been back a week or so. We were joking before we went on the air that you've been back long enough that your hair has grown back a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's pretty sunny there, so you either got to wear hair or wear a hat or both.
We talked to you a couple times via Skype from there, and you gave us sort of a sights and sounds from Djibouti in Africa. But coming back, what's the one thing you missed, and what's the one thing you did when you came back to St. Louis?
Well, probably the only I miss from Djibouti, I miss the people, of course. I mean, these are some really brave, young, mostly young people that raise their hand and put themselves in harm's way that definitely don't have to. So I miss some great people, an important mission. But things that I've missed here, the weather is so beautiful here. Everything is green, and there's no humidity, and the air quality is fantastic, and you can drive wherever you want. You don't need to let people know where you're going. There's a lot of freedom here for sure.
Now, are you done, or can you still be called back from time to time?
I should be done for a few years. You know, there's it's a period of dwell, they call it, where you're on. I should be here for a while.
Okay, good. Something you want to talk about, you were in Africa, the Ebola controversy, the Ebola story has sort of taken root and everybody's talking about it, but I'm so glad that you are putting it into perspective. Ebola is probably the last thing we need to worry about.
Well, in the United States, I think we should have, we should be aware of it. We shouldn't be concerned of it. In Africa, at least West Africa, there's definitely concern for it, but there are many other things in West Africa that need to be, many other things in Africa that are grave concerns, like malaria. So I'm still taking my anti-malarial pills to keep from getting from malaria. So since this outbreak of Ebola started, there's probably 600,000 people in Africa that may have died from a combination of either malaria or tuberculosis, which is also incredibly common in Africa. So, it's a big deal. I don't mean to say that Ebola isn't a big deal. It certainly is a big deal. It has, upwards of a 90% mortality. But it's not an incredibly transmissible disease. It goes from person to person, and this is definitely something that I would hope and hopefully expect that maybe in the next month or two that this is no longer a hot news item. However, tuberculosis and malaria most certainly will be a major killer worldwide of people for, unfortunately, their foreseeable future.
What is Lassa fever?
It's another type of, I believe it's a hemorrhagic fever that's in a similar class to Ebola. I'm not sure about the vector involved, but Ebola is a vector which is human to human, as opposed to the mosquito, which are everywhere in Africa. So there's plenty of people that are working on these problems. I mean, the malaria has been a huge source of important interest for the Gates Foundation. They've put millions and millions of dollars into it, as has the World Health Organization and many others. But to just try and keep this into perspective, every so often, we'll talk about swine flu or bird flu or this flu or that flu, which are very important diseases. I don't mean to say that they're not important and they can't potentially be a big problem, but we have actual big problems in our world right now.
It's a great point. We've talked about it as well, whether it's these parents who don't want to give their kids vaccines. Whooping cough is making a comeback. You hear there are outbreaks of polio. People aren't worried about that, and that doesn't get nearly the attention as this Ebola, which, granted, it's an issue. We should at least pay attention to it, but it's not getting near the attention as diseases that are affecting people right now in America.
in the world too. Polio for sure. I mean, we had there's polio outbreak in the part of the world where I spent the last 7 or 8 months. For sure, there is. So I think you make a really really good point that it's difficult because we need to feed the machine. The feed is the machine, the 24-hour news cycle. And this is definitely, I mean, I don't mean to take away from the fact that this is a horrible problem. And it is. It's something it's a disease that has a 90% mortality. But to date, there's been a couple thousand people that have been infected, and most have died from this, as opposed to hundreds of thousands. So
Do we
perspective
know?
is good.
Yeah.
Do we know how the doctor and his and the other volunteer, how they were doing?
I haven't heard anything lately, but they, the pictures they showed, they look like they're, pretty. Have level 1 trauma centers. We have the world's best infectious disease experts. We have experts in everything, and we have ICU care, and we have oxygen and ventilators and things like that. In Africa, they have almost none of that. So that the same person who is sick with the same problem has a much, much better chance of surviving it in Western medicine or the United States than Africa.
Dr. Jeffrey Lowell, we thank you for your service. 7 months in Djibouti. That's a tough stretch. We're glad to hear you're back, glad to hear you're safe and sound. We're glad that you're reacclimated to St. Louis, and now you can get your Cardinal news in the same time zone. So that's all good news. Dr. Jeffrey Lowell, Professor of Surgery and Pediatrics at Washington University. Thank you, Doctor. Good to have you back. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
Take care, McGraw. Bye, Kelly.